crucified. It would help alleviate the pain just a little bit. The pain was not quite as acute. The pain was not quite as sharp. Jesus offered this mixture, yet He refused it. That time hanging there, body dehydrating in the desert sun. We know that the physical is true. I'm sure that His lips were cracking. I'm sure that His tongue stuck to the roof of His mouth. I'm sure that He did have that physical need, that physical desire to drink something. He was thirsty. But I believe that there's also something else going on. You know, as I scratched my head over this week, I was thinking about the other time that we know Jesus was thirsty. We go back to John chapter 4, back to His encounter with the Samaritan woman at the well. As we come to this, I want to make two statements that I want you to keep in mind. Number one, who you think you are is not nearly as important as who you really are. Does that make sense? What you think you are is not nearly as important as what you really are. Let's look at this for just a moment. This Samaritan woman, we set the stage in John chapter 4. The Pharisees, in verse 1, had heard that Jesus was gaining and baptizing more disciples than John. I made the statement earlier, they had to have been Baptist. They were keeping count of the numbers. It said, although in fact it was not Jesus who baptized, but His disciples. Now when the Lord learned of this, He left Judea and went back once more to Galilee. Now when He had gone through Samaria, so He had come to a town in Samaria called Sychar, near the plot of ground Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired as He was from the journey, sat down by the well. It was about the 6th hour. And verse 7, here's where things change. Here is where our story begins to build. It says, when a Samaritan woman came to draw water. Okay, here's this. We know about Jesus. We know who He is. We know what He is. Remember what we said. Who you think you are is not nearly as important as who you really are. Who was Jesus really? The Son of God. What you think you are is not nearly as important as what you really are. Who was He? And what was He? The Messiah. But now this Samaritan woman, completely different story. Completely different story as we're going to read down and we're going to talk about that she was the wife of, she had at least 5 husbands, and the man that she was living with at the time wasn't her husband. We get the idea that she was not the kind of woman that you really needed to be talking to in public. She didn't have a good reputation. She was tarnished. She was a sinner. But you know, this woman actually had 3 strikes. Number one, she was a Samaritan. Now, Samaritans, where that comes from, and I want you to, you know this, I just want to remind you. Samaritans, when the northern kingdom of Israel, when Assyria came down and overthrew and captured Israel, they carried them off, but they didn't all carry them all to one place. They began dispersing them throughout the other kingdoms that they had conquered. The term that the Bible uses is diaspora, or dysphoria, and that's where we get our word in the English dispersed. So they had been dispersed out, and these Jews were living with these Gentiles. Well, what began to happen? Jewish men began to marry Gentile women, and the offspring of them was what was considered to be a half-breed. Half Jew, half Gentile. It's what the Jews considered unclean. It's what the Jews would call a dog. She's got a strike. She's a Samaritan. She's got another strike. She was a sinner. 5 husbands. One she's living with now, not her husband. So I began thinking about this. I began to have a little bit of compassion on her. It's easy to judge, isn't it? She's over there, oh, bad, bad, bad woman. No, bad Samaritan. But you've got to understand that in that culture and in that day and time, a man could divorce a woman could not divorce a man. Did you get that? Man could divorce woman could not divorce husband. So when she was divorced the first time, the way they would phrase it is that she was put away. In other words, divorced. That was a term. Second time, put away, divorced. Third time, put away, divorced. Fourth time, put away, divorced. Fifth time, put away, divorced. And now she's living with this guy. I'm beginning to think, bless her heart. This is a tough life. She doesn't have a whole lot of control over her life. She can't stand up to the man. There's not a legal system that's going to defend her or going to support her. She is at the husband, the one that she's with, his mercy. And 5 of them have shown her no mercy. She has been put away. She is a sinner. Third thing, she is a woman. In that culture, women had no rights. Women had absolutely no rights. Okay, she's a Samaritan, she's a sinner, she's a woman. Okay, baseball fans, you got 3 strikes. What are you? You're out. I'm glad that God is our umpire. Because guess what? 3 strikes and you get forgiveness. 3 strikes and you get forgiveness. I want you to look at this for just a moment. When Jesus came to her in verse 7, when a Samaritan woman came to draw this water, he approaches her. Jesus said to her, Jesus speaks to her, "Will you give me a drink?" The first thing we have is Jesus' initiative in this relationship. Jesus' initiative in the relationship is conversation. Jesus speaks. Guess what? It's the exact same way today. You see, you don't find Jesus, Jesus finds you. Does Jesus still speak today? I don't think y'all know. I'll ask again. Does Jesus still speak today? Absolutely. You better believe He does. But what He says, it's not just, "Hi, how are you?" He begins drawing her in and whetting her appetite. This woman said to Him, "You're a Jew, I'm a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink? For Jews don't associate with Samaritans." Verse 10, Jesus answered, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked Him and He would have given you living water." He's saying, not only does He initiate the conversation, not only does He speak, but He begins speaking of this gift. Not something that she can buy, not something that she can purchase, not something that she can earn, but an absolute free gift that He is going to give her. Now, does the woman want this? Well, yeah. Look in verse 15. She said, the woman said to Him, "Sir, give me this water so that I won't get thirsty and have to keep coming back here to draw water." She's got a partial understanding of this gift. She's still associating it with the physical, and Jesus is speaking of the spiritual. And she's got a problem. Remember, we talked about this being put away, about all of her problems, about the simple fact that she is a sinner. We got a problem there. Jesus says, "You know what? I've got an answer for that." In verse 17, "I have no husband," she replied. Jesus said to her, "You're right when you say you have no husband. The fact is you have had 5 husbands. Man you now have is not your husband. What you have said is quite true." What is she doing? She's repenting. She is confessing her sin to Jesus Christ. That sin is standing in the way of her receiving this gift. She is taking care of it with Christ's prompting. And look in verse 25 and 26. So the woman said, "I know that that Messiah called Christ is coming. When He comes, He will explain everything to us." And Jesus declared, "I who speak to you am He." Trusting Christ. You see, the woman came to the well because she had a physical thirst. But guess what? She also had a spiritual thirst. She had a spiritual thirst. Jesus said, you can draw this water, that's great, but it's not going to satisfy you for very long. The things of this world, they don't satisfy for very long. They promise everything, but deliver very little. Jesus said, I want you to give you something that is incredible. I want to give you something that is more than that. In fact, what I want to give you is this free gift that is actually me, the Messiah. And folks, He says the same thing today. When Jesus hung upon that cross, and after the darkness, after my God, why have you forsaken me? And He said, I thirst. I really began to think of this in the spiritual terms, not just the physical. Because you see, He had just spent 3 hours in the darkness. 3 hours separated from God. He had never known this before. From before the beginning of creation, He had never known separation from God. What was He thirsting for? Would a drink of water have been good? Yeah. But even more than that, He wanted God. That's what He was thirsting for. Folks, I want you to understand that each one of us come, and we have physical thirst, but every single one of us have spiritual thirst. We have spiritual thirst. And I want you to listen very carefully, to listen very intently, and see if Jesus is not speaking. He said, Paul walks through this in basically the same way when he said in Romans 3:23, all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. In Romans 6:23, where he tells us that the wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life in Jesus Christ. And in 5:8, where he says God demonstrates His own love for us in this, that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us, right here, right now. And in verse 10:9, Paul tells us how to receive this free gift. He said that if you will confess with your mouth Jesus is Lord, and believe in your heart that God has raised Him from the dead, you will be saved. That's how you drink, folks. That's how you satisfy your thirst. That's how you get the living water that will need nothing else. This morning, I want to invite you to come to this well. I want to invite you to come and to experience what that Samaritan woman experienced. She came not realizing how much in need she really was. She felt thirsty. What she found and what she realized was, she was real thirsty. She needed God. This morning, with every head bowed and every eye closed, I want to invite you. I want to give you the opportunity to take a drink of this living water. This isn't a formula. It's not saying a few words to get into heaven. This is truly confessing with your mouth, Jesus is Lord. That means, Lord means He's got everything. I'm giving Him everything. And believing that He rose from the dead. In other words, that He's got the power to give you this water. If you want to try this water, if you want to see what it does to your thirst, I would invite you to pray a prayer similar to this. Dear Lord, I don't fully understand, but I want to try it. I believe as best I can that You died on the cross, that You were buried and rose again. And Jesus, I confess You as Lord. I give You it all. All that I have, I give You. Come in and give me my drink of living water.